Picture this. You're walking alone on a moonless Irish night. The mist rolls thick across ancient stone walls. Behind you, hoofbeats thunder closer. You turn, heart pounding, and see him, a horseman charging straight toward you. But where his head should be, there's only empty air. In his left hand, he carries his own severed head like a lantern. His eyes scan the darkness, searching. And when those dead eyes lock onto yours, your fate is sealed. This is no phantom of imagination. For centuries, entire communities across Ireland lived in genuine terror of this rider. Tonight, we uncover the truth behind Ireland's most feared death omen. The Dullahan, Ireland's headless horseman, a supernatural herald who appears moments before death claims its next victim. Unlike the gentle spirits of Irish folklore, this creature brings only one message: your time has come. But what transformed an ancient Celtic god into Ireland's most terrifying death omen? How did this headless rider survive the arrival of Christianity and embed itself so deeply in Irish consciousness that sightings persisted well into the modern era? And why does this particular form of terror, the headless rider, resonate so powerfully across cultures worldwide? Our journey takes us from the warrior halls of pre-Christian Ireland through the collision of pagan and Christian beliefs. We'll examine documented encounters from rural cottages to bustling market towns. We'll explore the psychology of death omens and trace how Irish emigrants carried this dark rider to every corner of the globe. Finally, we'll confront the disturbing possibility that some encounters with the Dullahan might have been all too real. The name Dullahan comes from the Irish Gaelic Dullahan, meaning dark man or man of darkness. But this was no ordinary darkness. In the ancient Celtic worldview, darkness held the power of the otherworld, the realm where the dead dwelt and where supernatural forces held sway over mortal affairs. The earliest traces of the Dullahan reach back over 2,000 years to the Celtic god Crom Dubh, the dark, bent one. Crom Dubh was a harvest deity, but not the gentle provider of grain and plenty. He was the god who demanded blood sacrifice, who required death to sustain life, who ruled over the necessary cruelty of the natural cycle. Archaeological evidence from the Iron Age revealed that Crom Dubh commanded human sacrifice during the harvest festival of Lunasad. The victim would be beheaded, the head offered to ensure the community's survival through winter. Celtic priests believed that the head contained the essence of a person's soul, making decapitation the ultimate offering to the gods. When Christianity swept across Ireland in the 5th century, the old gods didn't simply vanish, they transformed. Crom Dubh, stripped of his divine status, became something far more terrifying: a fallen god, headless and angry, condemned to wander the mortal world as an eternal harbinger of the death he once demanded as tribute. This transformation explains the Dullahan's most distinctive feature. His missing head isn't a wound, it's a reminder of his origin, a symbol of the sacrifice he once commanded and the divine justice that cast him down. The Dullahan operates by ancient, immutable laws that Irish folklore has preserved with startling consistency across centuries and regions. Traditional protections against the Dullahan were few but specific. Gold, the metal of the sun, could repel him. A piece of gold jewelry, a coin held in the hand, or even a golden hair ornament might cause him to retreat.
Some accounts suggest that he fears roosters, those creatures who announce the dawn and break the power of night terrors. But these protections only worked if you spotted him before he spotted you. Once those hollow eyes fixed on their target, no earthly power could intervene. Our first account comes from the village of Slane in County Meath, recorded by a traveling merchant in the harsh winter of 1847. The cholera epidemic had already claimed dozens of lives, when Margaret O'Brien, a young mother of 3, woke to the sound of hoofbeats circling her cottage. Through her frost-covered window, she witnessed a sight that would haunt her remaining years. A tall figure on horseback moved slowly around her home, the horse's breath steaming in the bitter air. The rider held something dark against his chest, and as he passed beneath the pale moonlight, Margaret realized with horror that it was a human head. The head's mouth moved constantly, as if speaking, though no sound reached her ears. The horse's hooves left no prints in the snow, yet the thunderous sound of its passage shook the very foundations of her cottage. The rider stopped directly before her door. For a moment that stretched like eternity, the head turned toward her window. Its eyes, described in her later testimony as black as bog water, seemed to look straight through the glass and into her soul. Then horse and rider vanished as if they had never been there at all. The next morning brought devastating news. Margaret's elderly father, who lived 3 miles away, had died peacefully in his sleep during the night. Local accounts suggest he passed at the exact moment the Dullahan had stopped before Margaret's door. Our second case file moves to the market town of Athlone in 1863. Thomas Kelly, a blacksmith known for his steady nerves and practical nature, was returning home after shoeing horses for the local constabulary. The work had run late, and moonrise found him still 2 miles from town on the old coach road. The first sign of otherworldly presence was the behavior of his horse. The animal, normally calm and obedient, began to tremble and dance sideways, its ears pinned back in terror. Then Thomas heard it, hoofbeats approaching from behind, but moving far too fast for any earthly mount. He turned in his saddle and saw a sight that defied all natural law. A headless horseman bore down on him, riding a coal-black stallion that seemed to float above the road rather than gallop upon it. The rider's cloak streamed behind him like liquid shadow, and in his raised left hand he held his own severed head by the hair. The head's face bore an expression of terrible purpose, its mouth open as if shouting, though Thomas heard only the drum of supernatural hooves. Thomas spurred his horse toward the nearest farmhouse, but the Dullahan was faster. The phantom rider overtook him, wheeled around, and stopped directly in his path. For a moment that Thomas later described as longer than any Sunday sermon, the two riders faced each other on the moonlit road. The Dullahan raised his head higher, and Thomas was certain those dead lips formed a word, though terror had struck him deaf. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, the Dullahan wheeled his mount and galloped away, disappearing into a grove of ancient oak trees that local wisdom claimed was a fairy fort. Thomas reached home that night a changed man, his black hair shot through with premature gray. The next day brought word that the elderly priest, Father McCarthy, had suffered a fatal heart attack at precisely midnight. Parishioners found him kneeling in prayer before the altar, a peaceful smile on his face. Thomas never doubted that it was the priest's name the Dullahan had spoken on that terrible night. Our final case file takes us to more recent times and presents evidence that the Dullahan tradition survived well into the 20th century. In 1934, during the construction of a new road through County Cork, work crews repeatedly reported strange nocturnal disturbances. Equipment would be found moved or damaged each morning, despite being secured the night before. Local workers began refusing night shifts, claiming the area was haunted. The project foreman, an Englishman named Robert Crawford, who had little patience for Irish superstitions, decided to investigate personally. He spent 3 nights camped at the construction site, armed with a lantern and his service revolver from the Great War. On the 3rd night, he got more than he bargained for. Crawford's written report, preserved in the county archives, describes a mounted figure that appeared around 2 in the morning. The horseman carried no lantern, yet Crawford could see him clearly, as if the figure generated its own dim, unnatural light. Most disturbing was the rider's posture. He held something close to his chest, something roughly the size and shape of a human head. The phantom rider surveyed the construction site methodically, as if taking inventory of the damage being done to his ancient domain. When he spotted Crawford crouched behind a pile of stone, those hollow eyes fixed on the terrified foreman with what Crawford described as the cold attention of a hanging judge.
Then the rider was gone, leaving only the lingering smell of grave earth and the sound of Crawford's own ragged breathing. The foreman abandoned the site that very night and never returned to finish the project. The road was eventually rerouted, though official records cite geological instability rather than supernatural interference. The arrival of Christianity in Ireland created a complex relationship with the Dullahan legend that reveals much about how new faiths absorb and transform older beliefs. Rather than outright condemning the Headless Horseman as demonic, early Irish Christian scholars took a more nuanced approach. St. Patrick's own writings mention the dark riders of the old gods and acknowledge their continued presence in the Irish landscape. Rather than denying their existence, Christian authorities reframed the Dullahan as part of God's divine plan. In this interpretation, the Headless Horseman became an angel of death, a supernatural servant carrying out heavenly judgment rather than pagan vengeance. Medieval Irish monasteries preserved detailed accounts of Dullahan encounters, treating them as legitimate supernatural phenomena worthy of theological study. The monks who recorded these stories were scholars, not credulous peasants. Their careful documentation suggests that even learned men of the Church took these apparitions seriously. The legal system also had to grapple with the Dullahan's cultural importance. Irish Brehon law, which governed the island for over 1,000 years, included provisions for otherworld testimony. If someone claimed to have received a supernatural warning about impending death, their testimony could be used in legal proceedings, particularly in matters of inheritance or property disputes. English common law, imposed after the Norman invasion, showed less tolerance for supernatural claims. However, even English magistrates learned to tread carefully when dealing with deeply held Irish beliefs. Court records from the 17th century show several cases where English judges dismissed charges against Irish defendants who claimed they were acting on supernatural warnings, including at least 3 cases involving alleged Dullahan encounters. During the era of the penal laws, when Irish Catholic practices were severely restricted, the Dullahan legend took on additional political significance. The Headless Horseman became a symbol of Irish resistance to foreign rule, a reminder that some aspects of Irish culture could never be conquered or controlled. Folk songs from this period often depicted the Dullahan as a protector of the oppressed, striking down English landlords and corrupt officials. The Great Famine of the 1840s marked another crucial moment in the Dullahan's evolution. As death stalked the Irish countryside with unprecedented ferocity, sightings of the Headless Horseman multiplied dramatically.
Some historians argue that widespread malnutrition caused hallucinations that were interpreted through the lens of traditional folklore. Others suggest that the Dullahan legend provided a psychological framework for processing incomprehensible loss. Catholic priests during the Famine era took varying approaches to Dullahan reports. Some dismissed them as pagan superstition that distracted from proper Christian mourning. Others incorporated the legend into their sermons, using the Headless Horseman as a reminder of mortality and the need for spiritual preparation. A few priests even claimed to have encountered the Dullahan themselves while administering last rites to the dying. The figure of the Headless Horseman exists far beyond Ireland's misty shores, suggesting that this particular form of supernatural terror taps into something fundamental in human psychology. By examining the Dullahan's global cousins, we can better understand what makes Ireland's version unique. In German folklore, the Headless Horseman appears as the wilde Jagd, or wild hunt. This phantom leads a ghostly procession of the damned across storm-torn skies. Unlike the solitary Dullahan, the German horseman commands an army of spirits. His mission isn't to herald individual deaths, but to collect souls during times of great catastrophe, plagues, wars, or natural disasters. Scotland's version, known as the Durragh, shares more similarities with his Irish cousin. The Scottish Headless Horseman also serves as a death omen, appearing to specific individuals before their demise. However, the Durragh is more vengeful than the Dullahan. Scottish legends often describe him as the ghost of a warrior who lost his head in battle and now seeks revenge on the living. Perhaps most famously, American literature gave the world Ichabod Crane's terrifying encounter with the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. Washington Irving's creation drew heavily on Dutch folklore brought to New York by early settlers. The Dutch version portrayed the Headless Rider as a Hessian soldier who lost his head to a cannonball during the Revolutionary War. This American adaptation transformed the mythical figure from a supernatural herald into a restless ghost seeking his missing head.
What distinguishes the Irish Dullahan from these global variants is his role as a divine messenger rather than a vengeful spirit. The German wild hunt represents chaos and destruction. The Scottish Durragh embodies warrior rage that death cannot quench. The American Headless Horseman is merely a violent ghost, but the Dullahan serves a higher purpose. He maintains the cosmic order by ensuring that death claims its appointed victims at the proper time. This distinction reflects Ireland's unique cultural position at the crossroads of Celtic paganism and early Christianity. While other cultures viewed headless horsemen as agents of chaos or revenge, Irish tradition elevated the Dullahan to the status of psychopomp, a guide who escorts souls from the world of the living to the realm of the dead. The Dullahan's specific attributes also set him apart. Other headless horsemen are described as lacking heads entirely. The Dullahan, crucially, carries his own head. This detail transforms him from a figure of grotesque violence into a symbol of divine authority. His severed head becomes a tool of divine judgment, its all-seeing eyes capable of piercing the veil between worlds. Modern psychology offers fascinating insights into why the Dullahan legend has persisted with such remarkable tenacity across centuries of social, religious, and technological change. The human mind, it turns out, is exceptionally well equipped to create and maintain exactly this type of supernatural belief. Death anxiety, the fundamental fear of our own mortality, is one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior. terror management theory, developed by psychologists in the 1980s, demonstrates that most human activity serves to buffer us against the paralyzing awareness of inevitable death. We create meaning, pursue immortality projects, and desperately seek evidence that death is not the final word. The Dullahan serves this psychological need perfectly. Rather than confronting the random, senseless nature of mortality, the legend provides death with purpose, agency, and even a kind of cosmic justice. When someone dies unexpectedly, the community doesn't have to grapple with meaningless loss. Instead, they can point to supernatural intervention, to warnings ignored, or divine judgment executed. Pareidolia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random stimuli, also plays a crucial role in Dullahan encounters. The human brain is hardwired to detect faces and human figures, especially in low-light conditions when our visual system struggles to process incomplete information. A lone rider on a misty night, seen from a distance or through peripheral vision, could easily be interpreted as headless if atmospheric conditions obscure the normal human silhouette. Sleep deprivation, common in pre-industrial societies where people often worked or traveled by night, can cause hypnagogic hallucinations that blend dreams with waking perception. These experiences feel completely real to the person experiencing them, and often feature exactly the kind of supernatural figures that populate folklore traditions. The phenomenon of grief hallucinations provides another piece of the puzzle. Modern research shows that up to 60% of bereaved individuals experience vivid sensory encounters with deceased loved ones. In a culture where death omens are expected and accepted, these natural grief responses could easily be interpreted as supernatural visitations or warnings. But psychology alone cannot explain the Dullahan's enduring power. The legend also serves important social functions that helped communities cope with the harsh realities of pre-modern life. In societies where sudden death was commonplace, from disease, accident, or violence, the Dullahan provided a framework for processing loss and maintaining social cohesion. When someone reported a Dullahan sighting, it gave the community permission to gather, share stories, and process collective anxiety about mortality. These storytelling sessions strengthened social bonds and transmitted cultural values from one generation to the next. The legend also provided a mechanism for identifying individuals at risk. Those who seemed particularly troubled or isolated might be more likely to report supernatural encounters, alerting the community to provide support. From a neurological perspective, the specific details of Dullahan encounters align remarkably well with how the brain processes fear and memory. The legend's emphasis on sound, thundering hooves, the crack of a spine whip, taps into our acute sensitivity to auditory threats. Our ancestors survived by responding instantly to the sound of approaching predators, and that same neural wiring makes the Dullahan's approach so viscerally terrifying. The headless aspect also exploits deep-seated neurological responses. The human brain devotes enormous processing power to recognizing faces and interpreting facial expressions. When confronted with a human figure that lacks this crucial feature, the brain struggles to categorize the threat, creating a profound sense of unease that manifests as supernatural dread.
The Irish diaspora carried the Dullahan legend to every corner of the globe, where it adapted to new environments while retaining its essential character. In the coal mines of Pennsylvania, Irish immigrants reported encounters with a headless figure carrying a miner's lamp instead of his own head. The lamp's flickering light served the same function as the Dullahan's searching eyes, seeking out those destined to die in cave-ins or explosions. Australian gold prospectors of Irish descent told stories of a headless rider mounted on a ghostly camel rather than a horse, adapting the legend to their harsh desert environment. This version, known as the bushland Dullahan, was said to appear before flash floods or bushfires claimed their victims. In modern Ireland, the legend has shown remarkable resilience in the face of urbanization and technological change. Contemporary accounts describe the Dullahan adapting to modern transportation, with witnesses reporting encounters involving motorcycles or even automobiles instead of horses. A 1987 incident near Dublin involved a motorist who claimed to see a headless figure driving a black sedan along the M50 motorway moments before witnessing a fatal traffic accident. The Internet age has given the Dullahan legend new life and global reach. Online forums dedicated to paranormal experiences regularly feature accounts from people of Irish descent living around the world who report encounters that match traditional Dullahan descriptions. These modern testimonies often blend traditional elements with contemporary fears, creating hybrid versions that speak to modern anxieties while preserving the core mythology. Mental health professionals have noted an interesting phenomenon among diaspora Irish communities. Individuals experiencing grief or anxiety disorders sometimes report Dullahan encounters during periods of particular stress. Rather than dismissing these experiences as delusions, some therapists have found that engaging with the cultural framework can be therapeutically beneficial, allowing patients to process difficult emotions through familiar symbolic language. The legend has also found new expression in popular culture, though often in diluted or commercialized forms. Horror movies featuring headless horsemen rarely capture the Dullahan's role as a divine messenger, instead focusing on generic slasher themes. However, some Irish filmmakers have begun creating more authentic portrayals that honor the legend's deeper cultural significance. Urban legends in major cities with large Irish populations sometimes feature Dullahan-like figures adapted to metropolitan environments. Accounts from Boston describe a headless figure in a business suit who appears in financial districts before major economic downturns. London reports tell of a similar figure haunting the fog-shrouded streets of the East End, carrying his head in a briefcase instead of his hands. Return with me now to that moonless Irish night where our journey began. The mist rolls thick across ancient stone. Hoofbeats thunder closer. But now you understand what you're truly facing. This is not merely a monster born from imagination. The Dullahan embodies one of humanity's most profound and persistent needs, the desperate desire to find meaning in death, to transform the random cruelty of mortality into something purposeful, even just. For over 2,000 years, through the rise and fall of gods and empires, through famine and war and revolution, the Headless Horseman has endured because he offers something that no amount of scientific knowledge or technological progress can provide. The comforting illusion that death is not senseless, that it serves a higher purpose, that someone or something watches over the cosmic balance between life and death. When those dead eyes lock onto yours, they're not just marking you for death, they're telling you that your death matters, that it fits into a larger pattern, that the universe itself takes notice when a human life ends. In a world that often seems indifferent to human suffering, the Dullahan provides the terrible comfort of being seen, of being chosen, of being part of something greater than random chance. This is why the legend survives, not because people truly believe in headless horsemen, but because they desperately need to believe that death itself has meaning.
The Dullahan rides on, carrying his severed head like a lantern through the darkness of human mortality. He is our fear and our comfort, our terror and our hope. He reminds us that some mysteries resist explanation, that some truths transcend the boundaries between myth and reality. Perhaps the real question isn't whether the Dullahan exists. Perhaps it's whether we can bear to live in a world where he doesn't, where death truly is random, meaningless, and indifferent to our human need for purpose and pattern. The next time you hear hoofbeats in the night, remember, what you're really hearing is the sound of humanity's eternal struggle with mortality itself. And that struggle, like the Dullahan, is far from over. If this journey into Ireland's darkest legend has captured your imagination, there are more mysteries waiting in the shadows. The world is full of stories that refuse to stay buried, truths that masquerade as myths, and myths that might just be more real than we dare to admit.